Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, is with us, and former Labour advisor Scarlett MccGwire. Welcome to you both. I mean, Henry, polls, schmoles and all of that, but I mean, how significant is this? Just 2% behind the most successful party in British history.
That's true, although obviously it's not at its most successful at the moment.
True.
This is significant for two reasons. In the short term, even if it does turn out to be a blip or it's because obviously a poll listens to forecasts, it's going to have a big impact on the internal debate inside the Conservative Party. Those people around the Prime Minister trying to work out what policies to put out, what strategy to take, where to invest scarce resources, where to send the activists. The bigger the threat from reform looks, the more resources the Conservatives will commit to their right flank to try and hold off that challenge. And that means that they're more vulnerable where they're being challenged by Labour and the Liberal Democrats, which, it has to be said, is still a lot more seats. The second one is if it's not a blip and that result is replicated at the general election. Now, it probably won't really mean that reform pick up many seats, because in our system, you typically need to have a very geographically concentrated vote to break through in a single election. But it does mean in lots of seats, because you only need to lose by one, it could cost the Tories a lot of seats relative to if they've got a similar vote share without that challenger.
Indeed. And Scarlett, as a former Labour advisor, I'm imagining, you couldn't really care about this, frankly. But from a strategic perspective, it is incredibly interesting that a party that was formed about half an hour ago is polling so well. I know there is the Farage effect. I know that polls don't always predict accurately what literally will happen on the day. And as Henry said, because of our first past the post system, it probably wouldn't turn into Westminster success. But nonetheless, I mean, talk about sticking a ferret up the trouser leg of Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, I mean, I think what this is about is the fact that people have stopped listening to the Conservatives and they're looking for something else. I mean, I like Henry, I mean, I think in reality, after the election, we will find that reform might get one seat, that Nigel Farage will win. But what they're going to do is they are going to lose the Conservatives an awful lot of seats, because they're going to go, they're basically going to divide the right-wing vote, and Labour will get in. I mean, it's almost unbelievable. I mean, I talk as somebody, I remember 2019 and the shock I had when the exit polls came out, and they were right, that we were going to lose massively. And to turn it round this much, it's incredible. I mean, to be fair, the Labour Party has turned it round. I mean, they are way ahead, but reform is absolutely going to damage the Tories. But the thing about reform is there are two ways of winning elections. One is what we call the air war, the media, all of that, and the other is the ground war, is that people actually going out, leafleting, knocking on doors. Reform doesn't have that. The Conservatives absolutely have it, as does Labour and the Lib Dems and the Greens. The reform are basically going to be relying on the media.
Yeah, and look, we talked about this before, Henry. Nigel Farage is saying, and appears to be not just saying it, but really believing all the things that those disgruntled Tories want to hear.
He is, although of course the advantage of being Nigel Farage and the Reform Party is that you don't have to worry about how you would do any of it, right? Yeah. Like, I think the Conservatives have really suffered from the fact that they have, on so many issues, sort of talked loudly and then carried a very small stick indeed. So they keep talking up immigration control, but they're not actually doing it, because no Prime Minister has had the will to actually say to the Department of Business or the Department of Education, look, we need a strategy to sustainably bring this down. So I suspect that reform will only pick up a couple of seats, although having Farage in the House of Commons will make a big difference. It will mean that he has a platform, he can make those interventions, and it will give them access to short money. I think that the post-UKIP parties have actually suffered quite a lot from not having all that EU Parliament funding that they can divert away. So it is very difficult. I think, though, what this really shows is just the instability of the current system, right? Like 4 years ago, Tories won a landslide. Now, Labour are looking set to win a landslide, but I don't know if that will prove any more durable given the scale of the challenges that we face. And Reform UK's poll share is just another part of that problem. We don't yet have something, in 79, there was a big shift towards Thatcher, but Thatcher really then bedded that in because she had a really clear strategy for a really transformational agenda. Labour doesn't have it, the Tories don't have it, and honestly, Reform don't have one either yet.
And I wonder, Scarlett, whether Mr Farage and Reform UK, because they keep getting told, look, all you're going to do is give Labour a bigger majority. I wonder whether that is actually part of the plan, that they're perfectly relaxed that the Tories get a huge knocking and they return 70-odd seats, as some of the polls have predicted, which would be extraordinary. It doesn't put them much further ahead of where the Lib Dems were back in 2010, who I think had about 59 seats or something. It puts them in a very minor position. They might still be the official opposition, but it's a much weakened one. That's arguably, in a pincer movement kind of game of political espionage, if you like, that's where Reform want them, isn't it? Where they become the power brokers, as it were, and they can call some shots. They might not have the MPs, but they know they have the voter base out there, and that's when they can start talks of merging or, you know, doing things together, maybe.
Yeah, and Nigel Farage would like to run the Tory party. And but there will be an awful lot of Conservatives who will never forgive them for what they're doing. Right. But going back to what Henry said, I mean, I think we have a very volatile electorate, and I think quite rightly, because what they're saying is we have to believe in you. You have to do what you've said, and that is the problem with the last 14 years is broken promises. And so what Keir Starmer has to do, if and when he gets elected, is he has to keep his promises. I mean, he has to. We cannot go on having government by headlines. And actually, that's what Nigel Farage does as well. Nigel Farage has never had to deliver anything. It's really easy being Nigel. You just say, this is what I want. This is what I think we should do. I mean, if you look at Reform's economics, they are mad, absolutely mad.
What?
I mean, you know, we think Liz Truss wrecked the country. I mean, if they got near it, I mean, it would just be terrible.
I mean, on that point, Henry, there's all this row at the moment about, you know, where the Tories came up with this 2,000 quid figure that it's going to cost you under Labour, and, you know, Labour accusing the Tories it's uncosted, sort of issues around taxation, who's going to be better off, who's going to be worse off, blah, blah, blah. And lots of different independent think tanks have looked at the numbers and said, you know, but both parties look, you know, if you had to demonstrably prove in a court of law, is this all is probably not, you know, they're electioneering, fine. If you look at Reform UK's manifesto, zero income tax for those earning the first 20,000 quid, scrapping VAT on energy bills, freezing non-essential immigration, I get all of that, accelerate transport infrastructure, hire 40,000 new frontline police officers, fast-track nuclear energy, and the list goes on with doctors, nurses, increasing farming budget to 3 billion. I reckon if one of those independent financial think tanks got hold of that, I can't imagine what they would be saying about where the money would have to come from.
I mean, the one thing in that list that Reform or any government could do is fast-track nuclear, right? Because, you know, South Korea can build a nuclear power station for 1/6 the cost of what it's costing us at the moment. We could simply deregulate and change regulations to get that. That's the one thing on that list. But yeah, everything else will cost money. I think the fascinating thing is, yeah, since the election, we've had a few policies like, you know, the quadruple lock on the pension from the Prime Minister. But for the most part, Jeremy Hunt and Rachel Reeves are not that far apart on tax and spend policy. Rachel Reeves is committed to keeping most of the tax cuts and spending commitments made in the budget. Both of them know that we're on a really, really narrow precipice between taxes that are at historic highs, and there's not much scope to raise them without inventing whole new taxes, which no one will like, and public budgets that are under extraordinary strain. And I think that it's easier if you're Reform to be like, yeah, actually, we just want loads more stuff and we want it to be cheaper. And it's like, cool, how?
There it is. Final question then, Scarlett. You've been an advisor to a major party, to the Labour Party. If you had to put a Tory hat on for this, is there any way back for the Conservatives?
I don't think there is. I think they have to begin again after the election. And I, as an ordinary person, really, really hope that they move to the centre. I just think this ghastly playing politics with the right is really scary.
Well, we will see and watch in 4 weeks. 4 weeks to the day, guys, by the way. Henry, thank you. Scarlett, thank you too. That's Scarlett MccGwire, former Labour advisor. Henry Hill, deputy editor at Conservative Home, with us here on Talk. Is there any way back for the Tories?